I'm Rick Neitzel. I'm an associate professor of environmental health sciences here at the University of Michigan, and I've spent about the last 15 years studying issues around noise and hearing loss and other health effects associated with noise. I think for many environmental and workplace hazards, there are immediate health outcomes. So if you cut off a finger, it's quite obvious that that's damaged you. There's other diseases out there like cancer that are very dreadful and very feared. So if there's any concern about a risk of cancer, people become quite concerned about that. Unfortunately, noise historically has only been associated with hearing loss, and hearing loss is basically an invisible disease. People experience it. It happens very gradually. By the time they realize they've got the disease, it's irreversible and can be quite severe. But again, there's no blood, there's no dread factor. For whatever reason, Americans don't prioritize maintaining their hearing like they do with their eyesight, for example. So it's been very easy as a country to relegate noise to a second-class status as an exposure. Unfortunately, now we're learning that noise exposure is not just associated with hearing loss. It can cause heart attacks, it can cause stroke, it can cause other very substantial health effects. And so it may be an under-recognized and yet very important threat to public health in America. In the 1970s, I would say the United States was far and away the leader with regards to assessing noise and actually trying to do something about it. We had an office in the Environmental Protection Agency specifically dedicated to noise. But unfortunately, that office hasn't been funded since the early 1980s. And as a result, the United States has fallen farther and farther behind other countries. So I think the leaders in the world at this point would be the nations in Western Europe and the European Union. They've agreed collectively that noise is a priority issue. They're taking steps to understand what fraction of the public and what fraction of workers are exposed, and they actually are implementing noise reduction strategies. So that's something that we had started to do in the 1970s here, but unfortunately have abandoned to the detriment of the health of Americans, I think. Noise is a very frustrating environmental hazard. We're learning now that it can be just as important and just as bad for your health as things like air pollution and water pollution and maybe contamination in your food, but it's something that just continues to not get a lot of attention in this country. However, I'm hoping, sort of a silver lining, that activities in other countries like the European Union might actually have some benefits directly to us. So for example, the European Union is now regulating certain types of noisy equipment and forcing manufacturers to reveal how noisy that equipment is. Now as a consumer, once I have that information, it actually gives me the power to choose equipment that's going to be quieter. We're also seeing more and more manufacturers making quieter products. So for example, dishwashers used to be extremely noisy. Now you can find dishwashers that you can't even tell are running. And unfortunately, these are often marked up with a premium, but it does mean the technology's there, it's available. And the more information we have, the more ease we're going to have in terms of consumers finding quieter equipment that's going to actually make their life more healthy ultimately. I think it's pretty easy for young people to assume that they're never going to get sick from an environmental hazard like noise. Unfortunately, I've done studies myself where we start to see degrees of hearing loss that you wouldn't expect until very late in your elderly years in 20 and 30-year-olds. So people who have had very excessive exposure from music, from workplace noise young in their life, and they basically aged their ears such that the ears look like they're from an elderly person. So it's very possible, and in fact, if you have enough exposure, it's very likely that young people are going to unfortunately suffer from the effects of hearing loss. So it's very important for them to recognize that this is not an issue that's going to affect them 50 years from now. It may affect them today. I think many people would sort of implicitly acknowledge that if they can have a quieter life, it's probably going to be more relaxing and less stressful, and I think the data actually bear that out. But how do we go about actually finding some solitude and quiet in our life? So there's a couple things that individuals can do. So trying to schedule some quiet time into your day can seem very challenging, but it's really important to find a quiet space. It lets your body and your brain relax and recover from some of the insults that you've had from noise during the day. Trying to avoid noisy situations where possible, so removing yourself from a high noise situation. Not always possible, but sometimes it is. Trying to protect yourself when you're going to noisy events, like, for example, a concert or going out and shooting guns, making sure that you're using hearing protection to protect your ears, and just being mindful about noise. It can seem inescapable in our modern life, but there are ways that you can structure your life to guarantee that you have some peace and quiet. That's not only good for your ears, but it can also be good for your heart and your mental health and other aspects of your life. With regards to noise specifically, the good news is there are things we can do. We have technology to deal with this. We have proven strategies that work. So if we can simply get the will and the motivation to do something, I actually think it's quite possible for us to make some sweeping and very helpful changes that would improve our health. There's a variety of resources online that people can access. So there's a number of YouTube videos and other video resources that can educate you on noise and the health impacts of noise. There are a few professional organizations that have information about, for example, hearing loss prevention. The National Hearing Conservation Association is a group that's totally dedicated to preventing hearing loss. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Environmental Protection Agency, all of these agencies have information that's available online. And I would encourage people to have a look and do some serious reading on this topic.